In respect to the reporting of mineral resources and mineral reserves, the CIM sets out minimum standards for all oral and written disclosure that are reasonably likely to be made available to the public must follow the National Instrument 43101, Form 43101F1, the Companion Policy 43101CP, and the CIM definition standards. And we've already discussed these particular documents earlier in this presentation in some detail, so we're not going to spend any more time in discussing those further, with the exception of the fact that just to remind you that the purpose of the above is to foster greater standardization in reporting of publicly disclosed documents. So it's trying to provide a level playing field of exactly how information is being reported to the public. One aspect which I'd like to highlight in terms of the best practices is that they do refer to the reporting units which should be used when reporting to the public. For reports or press releases, either imperial or metric units may be used, but they must be maintained consistently throughout the reporting process. So if you're using an imperial system to report your units, then you must always use that imperial system, or vice versa. The mixing of metric and imperial units, for example, troy ounces per metric ton, is never acceptable. And finally, it states that the reporting in metric units is preferable. This is because the Canadian system uses metric units. We're going to now take a look, in terms of the reporting, at specifically the technical reports. And the technical reports are an important tool which allows a standardized way to report the results of mineral resource, mineral reserve evaluations using exactly the same reporting system and chapters, and allows an easier mechanism for people to be able to compare different deposits and different mines, with including exactly the same style of information between each report. It provides a type of bridge between the best practices for the actual mineral resource, mineral reserve evaluation process and the disclosure of those results as detailed in the NI 43101 reports. So the technical reports must be in accordance with the National Instrument 43101 F1 and 43101, and there are a number of obligations to when a technical report must be filed, and these include the first time disclosure of a project, the new listing of a company on the Toronto Stock Exchange, or a material change to the technical or scientific information in comparison to the previously filed technical reports. In the majority of the circumstances when the above occurs, it is required that the technical report be filed no later than 45 days after the public release of that information. So what does a technical report actually involve? Well, in accordance with the Form F1 provided under NI 43101, it sets out very clearly the expectations of the information which should be contained within a technical report. Everything from what should be included on the title page, the dates and signatures, and the table of contents, through each and every chapter where a summary of the information which is expected to be included, and in some circumstances not included, within each of these subsections. And it is a requirement that when a technical report be filed, that each and every one of these chapters and items be addressed, even if it includes making a note to state that no information is presently available So we're going to have a look at some of the CIM recommendations in terms of technical reports. They have some specific recommendations in terms of the fact that information should be as comprehensive as possible and easy to understand. Fundamental data such as commodity price and cut-off grade applied must be disclosed in the technical report. Problems in the collection of data or with the efficiency of data must be clearly disclosed. Modifying factors applied, such as cutting off high grades or resulting reconciliation to mill data, must be identified and their derivation explained. Mineral resource, mineral reserves are not precise calculations and must be referred to as estimates. The tonnage and grade figure should reflect the order of accuracy of the estimate by rounding off to the appropriate number of significant figures. So it would be inappropriate, for example, to report the mineral resource or reserve to the nearest ton, as it is very unlikely that that level of accuracy is available in the estimate where you could be confident to state to the nearest ton how much material you're going to be able to mine. And similarly, if you were to report a gold grade to the 6th or 7th decimal place, it's highly unlikely with the types of evaluation processes that you would gain that level of accuracy. Mineral resources must be classified as inferred, indicated and or measured only, and mineral reserves as proven and or probable only. Additionally, the CIM also recommends, as part of their best practices, that resources must never be combined with reserves and reported as resources and reserves. Categories must not be reported in combined form unless details of the individual categories are also provided. Inferred resources cannot be combined with other categories and must always be reported separately. So under no circumstances, even bar the above point, can you combine inferred resources with indicated or measured resources or with proven and probable reserves. Mineral resources, mineral reserves must not be reported in terms of contained metal or mineral content unless corresponding tonnages, grades and mining, processing and metallurgical recoveries are also presented. And when resources and reserves are presented, a clarifying statement must be included indicating whether resources are inclusive or exclusive of reserves. The CIM goes forward further in terms of this and recommends that resources should be reported exclusive of reserves. So the resource component would be removed as when the reserve evaluation is conducted and those numbers reported. Dilution and mining losses must be understood and duly noted. When a mineral reserve report is prepared, the related mineral resource report on which it is based should be developed first. So there should not be a mineral reserve report unless a mineral resource report has already been generated. Some more CIM recommendations include reconciliation of estimates with production whenever possible is required. When mineral resource estimates are reported, commodity price projections, operating costs and mineral processing metallurgical recovery factors are important and must be included in the technical report. Reporting of mineral or metal equivalents should be avoided unless appropriate correlation formula including assumed metal prices, metallurgical recoveries, comparative smelter charges, likely losses, payable metals, etc. are also included. And broken mineralized inventories, for example stockpiles, must use the same classification as mineral resources, mineral reserves. Mineralized material being processed, including leaching, should be reported separately. So it is possible to report the quantities of resources that you may have, if significant, in the stockpiles or on leaching pads, as long as you're clearly reporting those separately. The CIM also goes forward and states where the certain issues tend to occur within the technical reports, where the most common problems are, which they flag and then require the technical report to be resubmitted. These include that it doesn't support use of the proceeds, that there is no recommendations or cost breakdowns, that the maps and figures are missing or illegible, that some form of disclaimer has been placed in the technical report, that there are unfiled or unsigned consent forms, that there is a non-compliance resource or reserve reported, that not certifying has red disclosure, the QP has not taken responsibility for all the sections within the technical report, the QP is not consenting to the filing or usage of that report, the QP has not certified that he has read the disclosure, or there are non-compliant certificates. So these are the most common reasons for a technical report being rejected by the Securities Commission and them requiring a replacement technical report to be filed. So in terms of mineral resources, mineral reserves, in terms of any type of written disclosure, when those numbers are being reported, the following have to be taken into account. The disclosure must include the effective date of each estimate of mineral resources, mineral reserves, and the details of quantity and grade of each category of resources and reserves. So it must report inferred, indicated, measured, and proven and probable separately. It must include the details of key assumptions, parameters, and methods. And it should also include a comment regarding the extent to which an estimate may be materially affected by any known environmental, permitting, legal, title, taxation, social, political, marketing, or other relevant issue. And there should also be a statement that mineral resources which are not mineral reserves do not have demonstrated economic viability. And finally, in terms of reporting, there are a few other CIM recommendations for how mineral resources and mineral reserves should be reported. Firstly, they recommend that it should be reported in a tabulated format. The name of the appropriate QP must be included with the estimate and his relationship with the reporting company stated. Mineral resources, mineral reserves must be reported as estimates and not calculations. And the key assumptions and parameters used in the estimate must include the following: any metal price assumptions, the cut-off grade which is being applied to reporting the resources reserves, what type of ore losses and dilutions are being applied, the type of expected mill recoveries, what the type of estimation methodology is. The mineral resources and mineral reserves, as always, must be reported in their appropriate categories. Any year-to-year changes must be included together with the reason for those changes. And a statement detailing whether resources are inclusive or exclusive of reserves should also be included. And finally, the date of the applicable resource estimate should also be included. So we're going to now have a look at a fictitious mineral resource, mineral reserve statement as has been reported. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a look and see the types of potential issues that can creep into a mineral resource, mineral reserve statement if due care and diligence is not performed. So I'd like you to take a minute as part of this exercise to study the table and study the corresponding resource and reserve statement and see if you can spot the issues which have crept into this statement which would cause problems for the Securities Commission, and they would request it be removed and a new mineral resource, mineral reserve statement submitted. There are 9 in total. So let's read first of all the statement. So the mineral resources and ore reserves for the Propitious epithermal gold project are presented in the above table. The resources and reserves have been calculated in accordance with National Instrument NI 43101 by Mr. V. Sanguine, who has had extensive experience in the coal and bauxite mining industries and who is a member of a recognised professional association. Although the mineral resources include a substantial amount of inferred resources, the company has great confidence that further drilling will prove up these resources and has therefore included them in ore reserve calculations. The company believes that the Propitious project contains 3 world-class deposits and that the results highlight the spectacular wealth of this area. So let's go through these one by one. So the first issue, which you may have spotted, is that we have these 3 deposits: the promising, auspicious and could be great deposits, all reporting their resources and reserves. However, for each of these, they have not reported the different confidence classification categories. They should at the very least be reporting the measured, indicated and inferred and probable and proven reserves separately for each of the deposits. Let's have a look at number 2. Number 2 is issues in terms of the reporting of the gold grams per tonne. The level of reporting for the mineral resources is to 3 decimal places. As we can see, for the reserves it's just to 1 decimal place. So the reporting in terms of the 3 decimal places is an inappropriate level of rounding, suggesting much higher level of confidence in the estimate than actually exists. So reporting to 3 decimal places is likely to be inappropriate in this circumstance. Issue number 3 is, as you may have noted, that the reserves have been reported as ore reserves. This is in fact an incorrect use of terminology, and ore reserves may be applicable using the JORC system, but it's not applicable using the NI 43101 reporting system, and they would have to be reported as mineral reserves and not ore reserves. Issue number 4 is in respect to the total which has been added up across both the mineral resources and ore reserves. So the mineral resources and reserves have been added together and reported as one single unit, and that is not allowed under NI 43101. You have to report mineral resources and reserves separately, and you'd have to state whether the resources are either inclusive or exclusive of the mineral reserves. Let's have a look at issue number 5 in the press release. The statement below has used twice the word calculated or calculations. This is a misleading terminology and implies a greater degree of accuracy than is able within the estimation process. The reported resources have to use the term estimated or estimations. So let's have a look at the issue number 6. Well, it states that the person who is responsible for the estimate is Mr. V. Sanguine, and that he is a member of a professional association, but it does not state what his qualifications are or what the professional association he's a member of is. It does not even detail that Mr. Sanguine is regarded as a qualified person, and also what his relationship is to the issuer of this particular statement. Therefore, that would be a big problem in terms of conforming to NI 43-101. Issue number 7 is related to what's being reported. As we can see, this resource and reserve evaluation is for a gold project, and yet the experience which Mr. V. Sanguine has is of coal and bauxite mining. Therefore, it's very unlikely that he has the relevant level of 5 years experience for this particular commodity to be allowed to be reporting it. Issue number 8, again we deal with the problem of combining different resource categories. You are not allowed under any circumstances to combine, when reporting in a resource reserve statement, inferred resources to indicated and measured, and you are also not allowed to convert the inferred resources to a mineral reserve when reporting. So in both those circumstances, that would be a huge problem in terms of the Securities Commission and would require a retraction from the company reporting. Finally, the last issue which we have with this statement is the last sentence, where the company believes that the project contains 3 world-class deposits and that the results highlight a spectacular wealth of this area. This is the usage of over-promotional language. We cannot use over-promotional language to try and talk up a particular deposit or operation or exploration target in trying to deceive and trick potentially the public in believing that it's a better prospect than what the numbers and what the facts state. Therefore, we have to be very careful in being very clear and transparent and reporting simply the facts and allowing those to speak for themselves. I hope you were able to spot all 9 of those issues. If not, then better luck next time.